everybody. Welcome to The Whole Elephant, Season 3, Episode 2. I hope you enjoyed last week's, the first episode of Season 3 with Michael Orland. What a fantastic guy. Just really fun guy to get to spend some time with and talk to, and just super nice. You always love when people that are in those positions at shows and stuff that you love, when they turn out to be nice people. That's always a nice thing. And today, man, there is no doubt that the guest today is just an awesome guy, genuine, kind, loving guy. Bill Schnee is a producer, engineer, and I found out through reading his book, a musician himself who had a little bit of success early on in his life. Just an absolutely amazing guy, and I've known him for the last couple years and gotten to know him as a man and a person who I love. And so to be able to sit down and do this podcast with him and talk about his incredible career, I mean, Barbra Streisand, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, I mean, the list just goes on and on of the people that he has produced and recorded. Just an incredible career, and he's written a book called Chairman at the Board by Bill Schnee. Schnee is Schnee. I highly recommend because every chapter is just another story of an incredible artist that he was able to work with in his career. So sit back, relax, and listen to this chat with me and Bill. Hope you enjoy the chat. Bill, what's going on, man? Here we are.
You are, baby.
Welcome to The Whole Elephant. Thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for having me.
I have to start with a big congrats on the book, Chairman at the Board, recording the soundtrack of a generation.
Thank you.
I've heard a lot of people have a lot of different processes with writing books. Was it a fun process for you to write this book?
Yeah, it really was. I've always loved telling stories. You probably know that. And
I'm aware of that, yeah.
People have told me over the years, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? And I thought, well, the problem is it's just going to be, I did this, then I did that, then I did this, then I did that. And, the great thing, I guess, of course, is that I've had an insanely blessed time, a career that's still going on. And I have done an awful lot of things. But it was when somebody told me that, the 70s into the 80s was the most iconic time in popular music, never to be repeated again. And you were there. And when I heard that phrase, you were there, I realized, hey, I can tell some stories that have nothing to do with me. So it won't quite be, I did this and then I did that. I have to say that unfortunately, I was at 160,000 words when I turned it in. And the publisher said, no, it's got to be 100,000. So we chopped out, over a third in the editing process. And I'm afraid quite a few of those other people's stories, the editor kept wanting to put in the, I did this, then I did that stuff. But it's okay. I'm still pretty darn happy with the way it came out.
Well, it's also very fun that you can go on the website and get more content. That I had a fun time doing that this morning.
Yeah, that worked out great. Someone gave me this idea. I was bemoaning the fact that over a third of it was cut out and all that worked for nothing. And a friend of mine said, look, why don't you just get a website and in the book, tell the people if they still want more, go to this certain place. And so I got a website company that turned out to be a branding company and to build a website. And they said, well, you've never done billschnee.com. I said, no, I haven't. Do you own it? I said, yeah. And they said, well, it's silly. You should be branding yourself, not just the book. So that's what we did. And it's just one tab on there that's called Got a Key. And in the book, as you found when you read it, I guess, that there is a key and you can go in and read more stuff.
Give
and the
away
other
the
great
password
thing about
to the key. I don't want to give away I don't want to give away the password to the key. You got to buy the book to get the password to the key. But there's fun stories, including the classic Russell Brand story is on there. I loved reading that you put that on
there. That's almost worth the price of admission, although as you could tell, I had to tone it down. But
tone it down. It's a little toned down, yeah. So Bill, I've known you for a few years now. I've heard a lot of your stories, but it took this book and a quick YouTube to listen to the LA Teens, your high school band. And
Yeah.
when I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, cool. He had a little high school band. This was like a legit thing.
Well,
Legit record.
yes, it was. We got signed to Decca Records. I was right out of high school. I was 17 years old, and we had a band, and we were playing, bowling alleys and sock hops and anywhere that you could play. And we had started writing songs, and we went into a local studio and did some demos. And one of the parents of one of the band members knew someone who knew someone that was in the music business. And so, great, we sent the tape to him. His name was Gary Usher, and he was interesting. He was good friends with the Beach Boy Wilson family. In fact, he wanted to be a Beach Boy, but he didn't make it. But he did write In My Room and 409 with Brian.
Yeah.
And he had a production company that had just made a deal with Decca Records, and he signed us to Decca Records. And what some of the believers out there will find interesting is that also signed to Gary Usher was a group called Chuck and Joe, and the Chuck was Chuck Girard, who went on to start Love Song and has had a very successful career as a solo artist in Christian music. And we had one other person in the stable, and we all played and sang on each other's records. Chuck sang on our second single. In fact, he put his gorgeous falsetto on our second single, and I played organ on this young snot who was the only one out of this whole stable of artists that Gary had that had a mild hit. And his name was Keith Green, for those that know who
Yes.
Keith Green was.
I literally have a Keith Green record hanging in my office.
There you go. And it was pretty funny, because when I met him years and years and years and years later, and we're talking about how we got into music, and it was like, I was signed to Gary Usher. I went, wait a minute. Were you that little 10-year-old, 11-year-old brat? And he said, that was me.
That's
and
amazing.
He said, how about my mother? Wasn't she the supreme Jewish, mother pushing things around? I didn't really have any interface with her, so I didn't know about that. But
no, I mean, you guys were good. In the book, you describe it as kind of British Invasion meets Beach Boys. It's really good. Like both tracks. Yeah. Was it like your welcome to Hollywood and to the biz that they spelled your name wrong on the album?
Yeah, how about that? And the other amazing thing about that is that was not the single. That was not the song that Gary Usher signed us over. That was on the A side was another song. And in those days, disc jockeys held all the power. And so in quite a few markets, this wasn't that uncommon. A lot of times DJs, while they were playing a record, would play the newest single by whoever, but they'd also flip it over to see what the B-side was. And several of them picked the B-side, and that's what started to take off.
Yeah. You mention it in the book that it's very much kind of like the movie That Thing You Do, that it's a quick rise to getting a little famous, and then all of a sudden the drummer joins another band and the bass player joins the military or something like that, and then it's a quick fade. But that was your start. That was your intro into this world.
Exactly. And the real beauty of that is that Gary, when we did our first session, Gary did an overdub session where he brought in a session guitarist named Richie Podler, fantastic musician, guitar player, and as it turns out, engineer and producer. And so when our singles didn't make it and we got dropped in Decca, I went to Richie's studio and told him the sad tale. And he said, oh, you guys were great. I'll get you a record deal. Go see this guy, Mike Curb. He's going to go places. And those that know that he wasn't wrong about that. But that was our second deal. And it was going into Richie's studio and doing a track with him producing and coming into the control room and hearing the sound that came out of the speakers was the aha moment that just clinched me that I wanted to do that. In fact, I turned to Richie and said, can you teach me how to work all this stuff? And he said, no, I'm teaching Cooper. Go out there and do another take. But that was the moment that I knew I want to learn how to do this, because I heard an emotional impact from our band that I'd never heard. And we recorded at the best studios on Decca. We recorded at Capitol and Western, and two of the best studios at the time and two of the best studios today in Hollywood. And so it was just, but it was, the combination of Richie's studio and what he knew how to do and his engineering prowess that
Yeah.
made the difference.
So Richie was the one that gave you your first big break, recording
And then two
Three
and a
Dog
half, the
Night.
amazing thing is that 2.5 years later, I went back and managed to talk him into hiring me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got my first real break.
So do you to this day not know why he gave you that night with Three Dog Night? Did he
You
have a
know,
hot date? Like what was going on?
yeah, to bring you up to speed, I finally talked him into giving me a shot. He let me do a demo session and a publishing demo session. And I called him that afternoon and said, what'd they say? And he said, well, they said you were fine. I said, what now? So come tomorrow, dude. There's another company doing a demo session. Do that. And I did that. I called him in the afternoon. What'd they say? Oh, they said the same thing. You're fine. Okay, what about now? Well, come tomorrow night and cut tracks with Three Dog Night. Okay, what? And the thing is, they were working on their second album. They'd already had a hit. They were on their way to being one of the biggest bands in the country.
Yeah.
And the most interesting thing is that Richie wasn't producing them then. He would go on after that. They were doing their second album. He would go on to do all the rest of their records and hits. But he had been a huge part of everything that they had done. But he was only engineering at that point. And his biggest client was their producer, Gabriel Meckler, who also produced another huge group that Richie was doing, Steppenwolf. And so why anybody would throw a young kid into the studio with a major artist with his biggest client. If I'd fallen on my face, Gabriel would have said, is there something wrong, Richie? Were you trying to get us out of here? I don't understand. But I managed to swim. So yeah, I asked him, to answer your question, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I said, okay, Richie, why did you do it? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. And that was it. And then about 15 years ago, I asked Richie, come on. And he said, the only thing I can think of is that I wanted to prove to them how valuable I was, which ultimately he did. Ultimately, he did prove it, and he went on to produce both of those bands. But meanwhile, I did the first day and cut a track. Everything went great. He said, come back again. I went the second night. I cut another track. Everything went great. And then the third night, I got in trouble. They wanted something on the guitar.
What did do you remember what they wanted that you didn't know how to do?
Some kind of guitar effect. And Richie, being the phenomenal guitar player, I'm sure he had done all of those for them on the first album and on whatever they had done on the second album. So I had to call Richie. He came down, and that ended my tracking with them. But he still let me do overdubs with him, and so on. So yeah, I don't understand it exactly. I mean, it makes some kind of sense, but I'm just grateful. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, through that experience, through being 23 on the board for Barbra Streisand, for all those, kind of quick early successes, you were still going to business school because your dad wanted you to have something to fall back on when this crazy music thing didn't work out.
Yeah.
Did you have a moment with your dad where he got it, where he understood it?
Well, first of all, yeah, my Jewish father, doctor, and those that know anything about those kind of families know that there was a lot of pressure to become another doctor or at least a lawyer. Sure. So yes, even though I started college at aerospace, I quit college. I did one semester and quit college for 2.5 years chasing the band because they told us we were going to be stars. And then I went back with the tail between my legs as I got into Richie's studio, and then I got bored with college. And so I found out you could get into law school with 3 years if you do well enough on the LSAT. So I did that and started law school, and to shut him up, so to speak, and dropped out into the second semester because I didn't have good grades. I didn't have time to do all the reading between the sessions I was doing and the classwork. So I thought I'll drop a year and a half. If I go back, if music can carry me, great. If it doesn't, I'll go back and get the degree once and for all and then try music again. And obviously the legal system is probably a lot happier that I stayed in music. But to your question, unfortunately, no. He passed away rather early in his early 60s. And not too long before that, I had already had probably a couple of gold records, a couple of Grammy nominations and several gold records. And he came to me and said, Billy, when are you going to get a real job? And I
Mm.
said, Dad, this is my job, and I think I'm pretty good at it, and I really love what I'm doing. No,
Yeah.
he never did it. So if I ever end up on a psychiatrist's couch, we're going to start right there, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. You have your own kids, one of which is my friend Oliver, who wanted very dearly to go into music, wants to, is insanely talented. Did your experience with your dad change the way that you would give advice to Oliver later in
Yeah,
life?
well, of course, because, yeah, it worked out so well for me. And, it's a tough thing. I was just talking to someone today about, that the recording schools are full of people wanting to get into recording. Music has never been bigger. More people are buying musical instruments. More people are making music. There's more music being made than any time in history, and yet the opportunities for real professional, growth are so far and few between. It's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah.
So it's a tough thing. I used to I used to go into recording schools to talk to kids, and I would start with, okay, guys, just real quickly first, why are you wasting your parents' money? And then I would back off and say, look, you all know that the opportunities are not what they once were. But I know that if you have it in your blood, like I do, that you're going to want to chase it. And I'm not going to try to stop that. But
Yeah.
you obviously already know that that you're going to have to work really hard. And then I end with something like, and you guys, we kind of have screwed it up, which we really didn't. Technology did. But I just say, we screwed it up. You guys are going to have to figure out how to fix it because it's
Mm.
broken. Um,
Yeah,
so
I was just talking to a guy who had a long Broadway career, and I had asked him, how did you get your start? He's like, I took my headshot to the stage door at a Broadway theater. Well, you can't do that anymore.
right.
You know what I mean? Do you feel like we've kind of lost that sense of apprenticeship, that sense of mentorship, where it would be really hard, if not impossible, to find a Richie Podler who would take you under their wing and kind of guide
Exactly.
you through the industry.
Exactly. That's the thing, because technology has really, as good as some things are, some things aren't. And excuse me. And technology has really messed things up. And so studios aren't profitable. We've lost a lot of great studios. Uh, and you can't go and, because I had people when I had my studio, I had one guy that showed up. Someone had introduced him, and he showed up with a toilet brush, and he said, I understand I'm going to need this. And of course I couldn't turn him away. And and then another one, that one of my second one that I ever trained back in 1982, I had met with him and told him, I really don't need anybody, but I'll keep you in mind. And he was not living in Los Angeles. And, a month later, he called me and said, well, I'm here if you need me. And I said, well, come by. And he started coming by, and he grew into one of the best that I ever trained.
Mm.
But yes, you're absolutely right. So those opportunities are just not there.
Yeah.
And it was an apprenticeship program that worked really, really well, because you would start off doing whatever it took. My road, as I said, was a little different than most, kind of very unusual, in fact. In fact, all the people that I hired in my studio over 30 years, I never told them the story, because, I really do believe there's something good about paying dues. And the truth is, for whatever reason, I never paid any dues, really. I mean, I just went
Mm.
right from nothing to something. But uh, it's not the same kettle of fish that it once was. So
Yeah.
they have to make their own way. But the big difference, of course, is studios. A real studio back then was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's where you went to get trained. Well, now technology has given professional quality recording virtually free, but for $1,500 you're recording professionally. Doesn't mean that you doesn't mean that you know what you're doing, and that's
Yeah.
one of the sad things. But the ones that want to learn more, that's why they end up going to these recording schools. I mean, I'll tell you, every time I speak to a local one here in Nashville, a school at Blackbird Academy from Blackbird Studios, one of the best studio groups here in Nashville. I speak to them every semester that they start. And, I start by asking, how many of you have a hard disk recorder? I think in all the times I've talked, probably 6, 7 times, I think one person did not have one. So they all come in knowing quite a bit about, quote, recording. Right. And and now what's replaced that apprenticeship program are these online services that you can pay their subscription, and you can pay and watch masters do different things, so that you can learn still by watching, a master. Like I started to say before, you would start cleaning toilets or whatever you had to do, work your way up, answering phones, work your way up to finally being an assistant engineer, where you would watch first engineers come in and do it several different ways to learn what you wanted to do. And now the only thing that's left for these guys is to join one of these subscription operations.
Right. I mean, over the decades, you have been introduced to a lot of new technology. From that night with Three Dog Night to what you're doing now in Nashville, I would imagine the tech has gone through some crazy changes. Is there technology that you love, that you go, man, it is so much easier, I love this technology that has grown over the years? And is there technology that you loathe?
Well, they would be one and the same, actually. And that would be the digital recording on a computer. And see, the thing for me is I went kicking and screaming in the 80s into digital. Why? Because early digital didn't sound good. We went with it too quickly, and some assumptions were made by those that set such rules and guidelines that weren't exactly true. And so the early digital didn't sound that great. But with time and learning about higher sampling rates, higher bit rates, better converters both ways, to analog to digital, digital to analog, better filtering, everything about it has pushed digital to the place where it is now capable, not everyone's using it, but it is capable of making a much better recording than analog ever could have. Analog was full of faults, shall we call it, things that you had to learn to deal with. And digital has many, many, many fewer of those. And so now with where it is, like I loved editing in the old days, where you would literally cut with a razor blade the tape. If you were gonna, you had a double chorus and you only wanted a single chorus, you literally could cut the chorus out of the tape, splice it together, and you were done. And now that's a few key clicks on a computer. And with analog, if you made a mistake, you could be in trouble. If you cut the tape wrong, you could be in trouble. Fortunately, two of my mentors were excellent editors, so I learned and became, I do believe, an excellent editor. I'm very happy with that, and I love doing it. But on a computer, it's night and day. It's quicker, and you can't make a mistake because you can always go back and fix it again. They're one and the same.
Do you think that? I mean, I've seen some insane musicians come through your studio on different projects. The one that always sticks out to me is George Deering on guitars. Absolutely. I remember one day it absolutely blew my mind, changed the way I looked at music. You were recording circus music for Disney World, I think it was. Just basic da 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 da, and George had to play that on a mandolin, and he's just sight reading it, playing it. And I was like, holy crap, there's a different level of musicianship that I've ever experienced in my life. There's a whole nother stratosphere of musician. Does technology make that go away? Can we fake it because of technology too much? Do you think? Are we losing the master musicians?
Well, the short answer, of course, would be yes. Not just musicians, but singers as well. Because now you talk about what the ability of what we can do in a computer. Obviously we can change everything from timing to intonation to pitch, any phrasing, anything you want. In fact, the scariest part of all, it's already here, but the scariest part of all to me is that with AI, with artificial intelligence, how long is it going to be before you play 5 Neil Diamond records into the computer and now just, type whatever you want, or play the melody one time and you'll have Neil Diamond singing it. I mean, it's crazy what technology is doing. So absolutely. Now, but by the way, as I'm sure I told you at the time, when it comes to acoustic instruments especially, you happen to see, and LA is full of phenomenal musicians, but you happen to see what I think is one of the two very best in the city. And he and Dean Parks, if it has strings on it, they're going to play it. And whether you ask them to play it and ad lib, or you put notes on paper in front of them, there's nothing they can't do. Even in this town, I haven't worked with that many guitar players in this town, and they are a dime a dozen here. It's like actors in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Every other server in a restaurant is a guitar player.
Right.
But I've worked with one of them here that I put in that category. He's absolutely right there with George Deering. Absolutely astounding musician. So when you get to that level, you're talking about the 0.5%, not even the 1%. You're talking about the best of the very best. And I can only hope that, but what your question goes to the technology and what that allows. And my point would be that if you have a musician that's coming up, and undoubtedly he's going to have a computer and he's going to figure out how to fake it, so to speak. And so will he develop and redevelop and keep trying to get better and better? That's a very interesting point. I know that when the drum machines came out in the 80s, at the end, and records on the radio were all drum machine, 75-80% were all from a drum machine, not a human being. By the end of the 80s, there were no new drummers coming up.
Right.
Because who's going to be listening to the radio and get inspired by, we had, talk to drummers. They heard John Bonham in the 70s, and, they want to, oh, wow, I want to do that kind of thing. So your point is well taken.
I certainly don't want you to drop any names when I ask this question, but do you remember the first time that you were in a studio and a singer was terrible and someone said, we'll just auto-tune it later? Like, do you remember or remember the era where that really started to become a thing?
Well, I don't remember that specifically, and I've been very much against it. I refuse to do tuning myself. Mainly because it drives me crazy. Well, no, mainly because I don't believe, I said this years ago, we don't make records. I would say this to my people I worked with. Guys, we're not making records for the people that buy them. We're making them for each other. It's some kind of a glorified ego trip where we're trying to show how great a record we can make, kind of thing.
Sure.
And that's not 100% true, but I think the point should be well taken, because we do try a little too much, and some people more than others, for perfection. I don't think the average person cares if somebody doesn't sing 100% in tune. And yet we have the best singers in the world now tuning their vocals because they can't possibly sing anything out of tune. And I will not mention names, but several of my very favorite singers would never have had a career if singing in tune was that important. Sorry, that's just, they weren't, they didn't. I think people respond much more to emotion than they do pitch. So I think there's that. So I don't really remember the first time on a vocal. I do remember on Natalie Cole's Unforgivable, or as sometimes I call it, I just did it, didn't I, by mistake? Unforgettable, which I sometimes call Unforgivable.
You led with the punchline.
That was the first time that there was, and it wasn't, we did not have, the computers weren't running the show back then, but there was a hardware device that we had that you could change the pitch. And there was a young second engineer that had figured out how to do it pretty well. And on that album, she had 3 producers, and one of the producers had this guy, he was already starting to worry about pitch. So he had this guy fix the pitch, with her. So I do remember that. And, but I'll tell you what I do remember that really bothered me was the first time a good musician listened back to what he had played And he said, you know, I did this a lot better on the first verse than the second verse. Cut and paste it, please. Which means go back where you cut it, you know,
Yeah.
most people know that now these days, like on any kind of, cut it and then put it over in the second verse and replace there. And I went, oh boy, here comes the end.
Yeah. I mean, when you read the book, it's just chapter after chapter of superstars. I mean, iconic person after iconic person. And you mentioned a little bit in the book, you know, people ask you, how do you deal with egos? How do you deal with the entitlements? And I love that you said in there that, you know, your job is to serve the client. And so I've always found you to be really good at that bedside manner, how to deal with people in the room. Is that something that you learned through trial and error? Was there a mentor who kind of gave you that perspective? How did you learn how to deal with famous people through this process?
Good question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I can tell you that I may have told you this when I was getting to know you. I don't know, but I'm actually an extremely shy person.
Yeah.
And I remember very distinctly early on in my career when I'm saying I want to be a producer, literally talking to myself and saying, if you don't tell them you like what they do, they're never going to want you to work with them. And so I had to come out of my shell, which took quite a long time, actually. But in terms of working with big people and egos, I don't know. You know, I've always said, like I wrote in the book about Streisand, who I've worked with over the years, not consistently, but from, as you said, early on when I can't believe it when you said it, I really was 23, wasn't I?
Yeah.
From 23 to whenever. And I'm the only person that I've ever met. I hope there's more people, but I'm the only person I've ever met that can say I've never had a problem working with Barbara.
Right.
You know, she is difficult in the sense that she is extremely bright, extremely articulate. She knows exactly what she wants, and she's going to go for it. And I believe in that section, I even talk about the fact that, you know, on one thing that I know has helped me is that I've never been afraid to tell someone no if they're trying to do something that will hurt them. And you know, I'll tell them, you know, I could see it. I don't know that Barbara ever did, but I could see it with someone like Barbara, who is very quick, who would say, no, why not? And I would say, well, because it's liable to get us out on a limb, both out on a limb that could break off and we'll both go tumbling down. You know, here, there must be a better way to do that. But yeah, so it's, I have no idea how it happened. But I've, you know, someone asked me the other day, have you ever been starstruck by anyone? And honestly, I don't honestly think starstruck. I've been extremely honored in no uncertain terms. I suppose the closest thing, and this again, because I was 25, I guess, when I worked with all the Beatles, was them. Because if I was ever going to be starstruck, it was when John Lennon walked in the room, you know. But there was a little bit of it with all of it. It was a Ringo album, and I remember setting up the night before, and there were his drums, and I'm looking, you know, and oh my gosh, and that may not have been the set that was on Beatle records, but it was still Ringo's drums. And the next day he was going to sit on them and play, and I was going to say, you know, yeah, can I hear the floor tom, please? That kind of thing, you know, getting sounds. So that would have been the closest thing to starstruck. And fortunately, and then George came a couple of days later, and then 3 days, 4 days after that, Lennon came in, and we had three of the four in a room, which was almost a Beatle reunion. And in fact, the only time that three of them ever played together after they broke up.
Wow.
And I am convinced they were all there. This has been my interpretation after the fact, was they were all there to give Ringo a leg up. They knew their solo careers were going to do fine, but Ringo needed a leg up. So they all wrote a song for Ringo and played on it and such. And even Paul, we had to go to England to record Paul because he'd had a drug bust in the United States. And funny, I think it was marijuana, which is legal in your state. And but back then, and he couldn't come in the country for 6 months or 9 months. So we had to go there. But if he could have come in the country, it could well have happened that he would have shown up, and they could have, well, should we try one, lads? And it could have well happened.
I thought it was interesting that when you were talking about egos and entitlements, some of the people with the least amount of those things were the biggest stars. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and Michael Jackson as people who you didn't have those problems with. Was that just, did you find that was just part of their nature, or was there something to they had reached the pinnacle and they could just relax a little bit? You know what I mean? They weren't trying to prove something, or was that just their nature naturally?
I would not know their nature naturally. I only know what I experienced. I can tell you that uh, if I am allowed to call myself an artist, all art, I will say, including myself, you can always ask Sally, my wife, if you don't believe me, all artists are insecure.
Yeah.
Someone told me that in the very beginning. So we are all insecure. And I do think that at a certain point, and of course, the three that you mentioned that I guess I mentioned, but there were others, Mark Knopfler, uh, uh, David Gates from Bread, no ego whatsoever.
Me,
Boss
me.
Skaggs. I've never seen anything, of ego working
Yeah,
with any of them. And so
me.
maybe at a
I
certain
came into your
point,
studio with no ego. I
I'm
was
sorry.
completely me. I was completely egoless in your studio.
Oh. Good. Yeah. So yeah, I think so. I think the security finally must step in or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Mine still
Was
hasn't, but that's okay.
uh, yeah. I mean, was there? You talk about how nervous you were that first night with Three Dog Night, and then I'm just reading story after story. Did the nerves ever go away? Did you ever feel secure in your abilities, or
Oh
was
yeah,
there
that
always
that did go
nerves?
away. That did
Yeah.
go away. That definitely that went away fairly early on. You know, yeah. That fortunately that did go away.
A big part of this podcast, Bill, is my journey of listening to people's faith stories and what they believe and how that has come to be. What do you? How is your faith, God, spirituality, however you want to describe it? How has that been a part of your life?
Okay, well, it's pretty easy. I grew up with a Jewish father that wanted me to go to temple and a Protestant mother. And so basically, I knew nothing, is the bottom line. She didn't teach me anything. He didn't teach me anything. So I really knew nothing about
Mm,
Jesus. And the first studio that I worked in was owned by a Christian. And very sadly, as I've told the story, uh, he was the kind of guy that would never lie because lying was a sin. He told
mhm.
me that, see, but I watched him tell people half truths, so they went away believing something other than the truth. And so the long and short of it is, between he and unfortunately some of the Christian clients that he had, uh, if those were the only people I'd ever met, I would never become a Christian.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I met some that were a little better. And pretty early on there, like when I was 23, I did accept Jesus. But I'm ashamed to say, although everyone's journey is different, so maybe I shouldn't be ashamed. And it did lead me to my one of my philosophies. It's not how you get there, it's that you get there, whatever it is. So it took me 5 years and some catastrophe in my life to realize that, wait a minute, I've been faking it here. So at that point, I rededicated my life in 1975, and I never looked back. Funny enough, and so many of the things that, when you look back, it takes a bit of while to look over your shoulder and see things come together, how it all happens. And that certainly has been the case for me, spiritually thinking of the Lord and his place in my life. And so, yeah, it has been a huge part of my life, and has kept. I'm really, I'm so excited about that aspect of my life. I can't tell you. Now, it cost me certain things over time. I was offered to produce. I will not name names. A huge band,
Yeah.
and I knew there was a heroin addict in the group. And it's
Yeah.
not so much necessarily from my being a Christian that I didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to deal with a heroin addict. I don't know
Mm.
anything about heroin, I know something about what goes on with those kind of people, and I just didn't want any part of it. And
Yeah.
so there's that. And the other thing is, when I got in the business, now I started with a guy named Michael Omardian, who those in Christian music will probably know, who we started together. He came into that first Christian studio and with Campus Crusade for Christ, and we hit it off right away, and we started writing songs together. And we were both keyboard players, primarily, and he was about 20% better than me. But in 6 months of sitting at the piano with him, he became 40% better than me. And a year later, he was 80% better than me, and I stopped playing piano. And he went on to be a great producer himself in his own right. And but seeing in the rearview mirror is a wonderful thing from a spiritual standpoint, and especially seeing how all the pieces fit together, because you quite often don't see them at the time. Learn so many things. Like there aren't really, the adage, there really are no mistakes for Christians, because God can turn your mistakes into something glorious if given the opportunity. So yeah, it's been a huge part of my life. And the most amazing thing to me, there were no Christians when I got started. As I said, very few in the business.
Yeah.
And as the 70s, starting in the 70s and going through it, there were more and more and more. I'm talking about in Hollywood, of the great studio musicians and so on, which was a great thing. But and I introduced you to one of my favorite human beings, Abraham Laboriel, who is, if he isn't love incarnate next to Jesus, I don't know who is. But I've never been, if people talk, if I'm going to have a close relationship with somebody, again, I'm not going to name names, but I've had a close relationship with some huge people that where we traveled together and whatnot, and I talk about the Lord with them. I always start off the same way. You have a gift, right? And they go, sometimes they go, oh no, I don't have a gift. I go, oh, come on, you have a gift. Right? Yeah. Well, I guess. I said, well, if there's a gift, there has to be a giver. And that's how I open it up. But in large part, and so some of those, I'm sure the word is, I don't know, but I'm always amazed at how many people learned. You could tell from how they talk to me or what they wouldn't say around me that they knew I was a believer. And so it's been kind of cute that way. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, other than that, with the one heroin addict, did you ever find times where your faith and career were at odds, where you had to turn things down or not feel, or you feel uncomfortable recording someone or something, or were they ever at odds like that?
Yeah, they're definitely, I don't think anything too awfully, we all make mistakes, that's for sure. I'm pretty happy with the choices that I've made all along. Sometimes when producing someone and they're writing the lyrics and I'm going, geez, I would rather not have said that. But, and there I am again, because as you said, I said, I believe as an engineer or a producer, you're there to serve the artist and their music. And if you've agreed to work for them, it's kind of difficult to now say, I don't believe that does being a Christian any good, to say, I can't really work on this anymore. But,
sure.
Now, if it was extremely compromising, I would have to do that. Unfortunately, it's never been that. But I will say that there have been some lyrics on some records I've produced, almost always having to do with sex in one form or another, that I would rather have not, I would have said another way. I managed to steer a couple of them away from it by making suggestions, but there's a couple that one or two in particular that still bug me. But
but those Amy Grant albums turned out fine. Just kidding. Well, man, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I mean, after reading the book, really the biggest thing that I wanted to ask you is, are you able to look back and, like, from the outside looking in, anyone would call your career and your journey iconic? Are you able to look back and realize that about yourself?
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I got somewhere between half and 2/3 of the written book, and I had taken a little break, And I went back and just started not reading it, but skimming like the chapter titles and stuff. And it all of a sudden dawned on me, that like, oh my gosh, I writing the book really drove it home. I mean, obviously, you're going along from one phenomenal artist to the next. You've done when I realize how great it is, but that was just my life. I'm living my life, and so you come and develop a good relationship with somebody like a Mark Knopfler, who is one of the most, on anybody's list, one of the best 10 best guitar players ever to pick up a guitar. Right. And he turns out to be just a great guy, and just enjoy talking to him, and not to mention that he's a car guy like me, it's just a wonderful thing especially when they're incredible people like that.
Yeah. The book is Chairman at the Board. I'm sure people can find it on Amazon, anywhere you can buy a book, right?
Anywhere you buy books, yeah.
And BillSchnee.com.
Yeah, there you can order it from there. Somebody told me that had written a book that when I was waiting, it's been published, and waiting and waiting, and he said, well, someday you're going to get a box. The postman's going to bring you a box, and you're going to open it, and there's going to be books in there, and hardcover books, and you'll pick it up and look at it, and you'll go, it's a reality. And that day did come, and it was a reality. Yeah. But I'll tell you what was even more fun was when I went to Barnes and Noble and asked, where are the music books? And they said, right over there. And I went and picked one up and looked at it and went, wow.
That's awesome.
It's just so odd to me, because obviously it's something that I never thought about, because, I started as a musician and I intend on dying as a musician. So,
yeah. Well, it's a great book. I encourage everyone to pick it up. Bill, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you. I love you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I love you too. And have a blessed day.